The slap echoed through the dining room. My father stood over me, face twisted with rage. "Get out of this house. You're no longer my daughter, and you're fired as VP. Step down, or I'll make sure you lose everything." My sister Amanda looked away, guilty but silent. She'd been his pawn sent to ask for help with my $3 million beachfront villa, the property I'd spent 10 brutal years earning while she partied through life on Daddy's dime. But this wasn't about helping Amanda start a rental business. I'd discovered the truth: my father was hiding nearly $2 million in failed investments. He needed my villa as collateral to cover his losses. And when I said no, he tried to destroy me. What he didn't know, I'd been preparing for this moment since I was 25 years old. See, my mother died when I was 23. Before she passed, she gave me a locked box and whispered, "Don't open this until you're ready to fight back." Inside were documents that would shatter everything my father had built his reputation on, proof that the empire he claimed to create from nothing was actually funded by my mother's family money, proof that he'd systematically erased her from history. For 10 years I'd waited, built my career, secured my power, gathered allies, and now standing in his house with my cheek still burning, I smiled. "Dad, did you forget?" "Forget what?" he screamed. "Who actually owns this company? Because it's not you, it never was." This is the story of how I took back everything he stole and made sure my mother's name would never be forgotten again. My name is Brittany Davis. I'm 35 years old, Vice President of Operations at Davis Enterprises, and for the past decade, I've been playing the longest game of chess in my life. Today, the board finally tilted in my direction. I sat in Patricia Morrison's office on the morning of my birthday, watching her slide a thick manila envelope across the mahogany desk. The early September light filtered through the windows of her downtown law firm, casting everything in that golden hour glow that made even legal documents look almost sacred. "Happy birthday, Brittany," Patricia said, her voice carrying the weight of 12 years of patience. "Your mother's trust releases today. You now have full control." My hands didn't shake as I opened the envelope. I'd been preparing for this moment since I was 25 years old. Inside were certified documents that represented everything my mother had protected for me: 45% ownership of Davis Enterprises, direct title to my $3 million beachfront villa, and $800,000 in investment accounts. All of it had been held in trust since my mother died, managed by my father as trustee, waiting for this exact day when I turned 35, and the control would transfer entirely to me. Patricia watched me review each document with the careful attention she'd taught me to apply to everything. "Your mother was meticulous," she said. "When Elizabeth came to me in the months before she died, she knew exactly what she was doing. The probate court approved this trust structure, and your father signed off on it because he had no choice. She made sure of that." I looked up at her. "He's been acting as trustee all these years, managing my assets." "Managing, yes, but not controlling. Not really." Patricia pulled out another folder. "I've been co-trustee this entire time, exactly as your mother specified. Every major decision about those assets required my approval, not just his. He couldn't sell anything, couldn't encumber anything, couldn't transfer anything. He had authority in name, but I held the actual power of approval." It was the same legal fortress my mother had built around me when I was too young to defend myself. And now at 35, I was finally old enough to man the walls myself. But this wasn't a surprise. I'd known this day was coming for a decade. I was 23 when my mother died of cancer. 23 and drowning in grief, barely keeping my head above water as I finished my undergraduate degree. In those last weeks when she was so weak she could barely lift her hand, she'd pressed a small locked box into my palm. "Don't open this yet," she'd whispered, her voice thin as paper. "Wait until you're old enough to fight back. When you're ready, go to Patricia Morrison at Sterling and Associates. She'll know what to do." I kept that box sealed for 2 years, hidden in the back of my closet like a grenade I wasn't ready to throw. I graduated. I started working at the family company in an entry-level operations role. I watched my father accept awards for entrepreneurship and give speeches about being self-made, and something in his revised version of history made my skin crawl. When I was 25, I finally opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter in my mother's careful script, detailing how she'd funded the company with $2 million from her family trust. There were copies of wire transfer receipts, bank statements, and a USB drive labeled "For Patricia Legal Evidence." But it was the note tucked at the bottom that I still remember word for word. Brittany, your father married me for love, but he also married my money. He's not evil, but he's weak. Weak men do terrible things when their ego is threatened. By the time you read this, he will have rewritten our history. Don't let him rewrite yours. The next day, I called Patricia Morrison. She showed me everything. The original probate filings that listed my mother's assets as separate property inheritance from her family, not marital assets. The operating agreement from 1998 showing Elizabeth Chen Davis as the managing member who'd founded Davis Enterprises with her family's money. The legal structure she'd built to protect me, shares in trust, until I turned 35 with Patricia as co-trustee to keep my father from abusing his position. Your mother knew what she was doing. Patricia had told me 10 years ago in this same office. She loved your father, but she wasn't blind to his weaknesses. She gave you 10 years, Brittany. Use them. Build your career. Build your credibility. Build your network. When you turn 35, you'll have the legal power. But you'll need more than that. You'll need respect. So that's exactly what I did. I earned my MBA from Northwestern, studying nights and weekends while working full-time. I climbed from entry-level to manager to director to vice president of operations, proving my competence at every level. I cultivated relationships with our key clients, Meridian Properties, Coastal Holdings, Summit Real Estate Group, until they trusted me more than they trusted my father. Over the past 3 years alone, I'd personally brought in clients that now represented 65% of our revenue. If I left tomorrow, they'd probably follow me. I documented every questionable decision my father made, every time he prioritized ego over strategy, every instance of financial risk he took without proper board approval. I built a life outside his shadow nonprofit board positions, my own investment portfolio, my own professional network. I became the competent daughter, the reliable one, even if I wasn't the favorite. And through it all, I waited. Davis Enterprises grew to $28 million in annual revenue with 150 employees. My father remained CEO, increasingly out of touch with day-to-day operations, but convinced of his own indispensability. My sister Amanda drifted through her 20s, 2 failed attempts at college, a brief stint as a social media coordinator, now unemployed and living with Dad. She believed his version of history, that he'd built everything from nothing, that I was somehow ungrateful, that family should help family without question. She had no idea that the company was built on our mother's money. She had no idea that she owned 25% of it in her own trust. She had no idea that our father had been rewriting history for 12 years, erasing the woman who'd actually made it all possible. Now, sitting in Patricia's office with the trust documents finally in my hands, I felt the weight of those 10 years of preparation settling into place, like the final piece of a puzzle. "What happens now?" I asked Patricia. She smiled, not warmly, but with the satisfaction of a chess player who'd just set up a winning position. "Now, Brittany, your father is about to discover that he's been managing assets he no longer controls. And based on what you've told me about his recent behavior, I suspect he's going to make some very poor decisions in response." She was right. I'd spent 10 years building my fortress, learning the business, earning respect, gathering evidence, and waiting for the legal power to shift into my hands. What I didn't know was that my father had spent the same 10 years building my trap. And in 2 weeks, he was going to spring it. 2 weeks after my birthday, I received the formal notice, emergency board meeting 10 days out, agenda item listed as executive restructuring and succession planning. The timing wasn't coincidental. My father had exactly 10 days after my trust release to realize he no longer controlled my assets. Now he was making his move. I knew our board composition by heart. 7 members total, my father as chairman, myself, our CFO James Chen, 3 outside directors, and Donald Fraser, my father's attorney, who'd been on the board for 15 years. My father controlled 4 votes reliably himself, Fraser, and Robert Hayes, who owed Dad for steering commercial contracts his way years ago. I had potential allies in James and Linda Martinez, a business ethics professor from UCLA. Thomas Patel was the swing vote, and he played his cards close. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early. The conference room overlooked the city floor-to-ceiling windows, making everything feel exposed. My father walked in precisely at 9, Amanda trailing behind him in a navy dress that looked borrowed from someone else's professional wardrobe. "Thank you all for coming." Dad began, his CEO voice smooth and assured. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about the future of this company, about legacy and opportunity. We need fresh energy at the top, new perspectives." He clicked to his first slide. Amanda's photo appeared with the title VP of Client Relations. I'm proposing we bring Amanda onto the executive team. She has incredible people skills, natural charisma, and it's time she had a real opportunity to contribute to the family business. Linda's eyebrow raised slightly. Amanda had been unemployed for 8 months. Of course, we'll need to reorganize to make room, Dad continued. Brittany has done exceptional work building our operational infrastructure. I think it's time we let her focus entirely on that strength. I'm proposing we move her from VP of Operations to VP of Internal Affairs, streamlining processes, managing administrative functions, really diving deep into the systems that make us run. The words sounded complimentary. The reality was a demotion disguised as specialization. VP of Internal Affairs meant no client contact, no strategic decisions, no visibility. I'd be managing office supplies while my sister took meetings with the clients I'd spent 3 years cultivating. I'd like to call for a vote, Dad said. Robert Hayes voted yes immediately. Donald Fraser followed. Thomas Patel hesitated, then raised his hand yes. My father's smile was triumphant as he added his own vote, 4-3. The restructuring passed. I objected on record, my voice calm and measured. I believe this decision prioritizes optics over operational reality. But I respect the board's authority. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I simply noted my opposition for the minutes. My father looked almost confused by my restraint. He'd expected a battle. Instead, I was giving him exactly enough rope. The villa trap came 3 days later. Amanda showed up at my downtown apartment on a Tuesday evening, nervous energy radiating off her like heat. "Can I come in?" she asked. "I need to talk to you about something." I let her in, poured us both wine, and waited. "I know we haven't been close," she started, the words clearly rehearsed. "But I'm trying to build something real for myself. Dad suggested I start a vacation rental business, and I thought about your villa. It's just sitting there most of the time, right? Maybe I could use it. I'd pay rent eventually once things take off." "Do you have a business plan?" I asked. Her face fell. "Dad said he'd help me develop one. He knows the industry better than I do." There it was, the setup. Amanda as the front dad pulling the strings. I spent the next 2 days digging. Patricia made some calls to her network. My father had approached a private lender about a $2 million loan listing family property assets as potential collateral. He couldn't legally touch my villa, but he was building a scenario. Amanda leases the property. The business takes on debt that's actually Dad's debt in disguise. The business fails. And suddenly, there's pressure to sell my villa to cover Amanda's obligations that Dad would magnanimously offer to help pay. It was a shell game converting my asset into his escape route. I called Amanda and told her no, gently but firmly. "I'm not comfortable mixing family and business this way. If you want to start a company, I'll help you write a real business plan and connect you with legitimate lenders. But I won't put my property at risk." She was hurt, confused. She genuinely thought this was her chance at something meaningful. 2 days later, she let slip what Dad had said when she reported my refusal. "I told you she wouldn't help family. She's selfish, always has been. She takes after her mother's side, cold and calculating." That comment meant to poison her against me did something else entirely. Amanda had started to wonder why our father spoke so negatively about the mother she barely remembered. The breaking point came that Friday. Dad demanded a family dinner at his house. Just the 3 of us, no witnesses. I went because I wanted to see how far he'd push. We barely made it through the appetizers before he started. "Everything you have because of this family, because of me. That house, your job, your education. I paid for it all." I set down my fork. "You didn't pay for anything, Dad. Mom did." His face flushed. "Your mother supported my vision. I built this company. Did you?" Because the probate records tell a different story. The air went cold. He realized in that moment that I knew, that I'd always known. "If you try to embarrass this family with your mother's versions of history, you'll regret it," he said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "I'll make sure you have no place in this company or this family." I stood to leave. This dinner was over. "Sit down. I'm not finished." "Yes, you are." As I walked toward the door, he grabbed my arm, not hard enough to bruise, but aggressive enough to make his point. I pulled away sharply. "Do not touch me." Amanda sat frozen at the table, her face pale. She'd never seen him like this, desperate, grasping, unraveling. I drove home in silence. An hour later, my phone buzzed. "Amanda, can we talk alone?" I responded, "Not yet, but soon." My father had tried to take my power through corporate maneuvering, my property through manipulation, and my place in the family through intimidation. He'd failed at all three. But he didn't know the worst part. I'd been counting on him to try. Every aggressive move he made was another piece of evidence I'd need later. Every boundary he crossed was another witness to his desperation. He thought he was winning. He didn't realize he was building my case. 3 weeks after that disastrous dinner, I filed the notice through Patricia. As a 45% shareholder, corporate bylaws gave me the right to call a special meeting to address matters of corporate governance. My stated agenda was deliberately vague: review of company founding history and discussion of corporate transparency initiatives. Specific enough that the board knew something was coming, vague enough that my father couldn't block it on procedural grounds. He controlled 55% of the votes, his 30% plus Amanda's 25%, that he managed as trustee until she turned 30. I couldn't outvote him, but that wasn't my play. I wasn't there to win a voting war. I was there to